Hello, welcome to another how-to webinar from the TPS Southern Region. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today I'm going to talk a bit about primary source analysis when it comes to image-based primary sources. So first of all, I do want to address what I mean by image. And so this can be anything that, is visual that you look at as opposed to read. And so, for example, there are a lot of prints at the Library of Congress website, including engravings, lithographs, um, like this one. Here we have a wood block print that is hand painted. Here is not a print. This is a drawing that is filled in with charcoal and ink. This is a baseball card, which counts as an image. It is a print that depicts something. Here we have graphic arts, which is a good example of an image-based primary source. So this is a poster from the WPA collections. This is a painting on the side of a building. So this is a picture of a mural that depicts in larger than life size a story. So all of these different types of primary source formats fit under the larger category of images, but there's one kind in particular that tends to get used more than these other ones, and that is photographs. They are so engaging, and there's so many amazing primary source photographs at the Library of Congress website. So we're going to focus mainly on photographs today, looking at different strategies for analyzing them. So first of all, you have the analysis strategy that the Library of Congress has on its teachers page, which organizes your thoughts into three main columns: observe, reflect, and question. So first, you look at and tell us what you see. And in the middle column, you start to bring in your own background knowledge to generate and test hypotheses and start kind of figuring out what's going on. And in the third column, you ask questions about what you wonder about what is going on, and that leads to further investigation, which is at the bottom. Now, we used this model as a basis for a worksheet that we created at Middle Tennessee many, many years ago, and it's available through the TPS Southern Region website, and we call it the Image Analysis Form. And it's basically the same model, but we take that observe step and we break it into two, where we're separating into objective observation, which is, okay, what do you see that anyone else looking at this photograph would also see? And subjective observation, which asks viewers to kind of bring in their feelings. What does this, what kind of mood do you think this represents? What does it remind you of? Just so that people can start thinking about the fact that they do kind of separate those things in their mind, but then when they're talking about their observations, tend to jumble them a bit together. And then, what kind of knowledge do you already have that helps you make sense out of what you're seeing, etc. So these are two great graphic organizers to help you in your analysis process. And I'm going to post links to them in the description box below. But there are some other kinds of strategies that you can use when looking at photographs, and we're going to go through some of those in the rest of the webinar. So one of them is finding the focal point. And that's what you do when you're looking at a piece of art, right? It's visual based, so where does your vision go first? What do you think attracts your eye more than other kinds of parts of this photograph? So you might, for example, be looking first at what goes on in the middle. The middle is usually where people look to find the focal point. Or you can notice that, okay, you have four men here that look like they're doing some sort of action, some sort of business transaction or something like that. So that might be where your eye goes first. For me, my eye goes first to these people who are actually making eye contact with me, and that really draws my eye, which of course is the whole definition of what a focal point is. Or you might look at what's in the front. And this rack right here that looks like it has Sliced bread and other kinds of baked goods is kind of right in the middle, front and center of this photograph, and so it might draw your eye first. So that's one strategy. Let's look at another. This one's called background versus foreground. And you can separate this in terms of like action versus inaction, or things that seem closer to you versus things that seem farther away. For example, if we focus on what's going on kind of in the background, we see the shelves and the back wall and get a sense of the building that these people are in. If we focus on the foreground, we're looking at the people and the action that is taking place that looks like they are closer to the actual photographer. So that's another strategy. We can ask what's there versus what's not there. This can also be who's there versus who's not there. So we see men, we see black men and white men. We don't see any women or children. We don't see any older adults. So that might be an observation. What's there? We see a lot of household items, some small tools, lots of foodstuffs. We don't see a lot of large-scale outdoor things. We don't see, clothes for sale. So that might be another observation. Another strategy is called cut into pieces. So this is where you literally print out this photograph on a large piece of paper and you take a pair of scissors and you cut it into pieces and pass each one out to a different person so that they can really concentrate on what's in their little piece and then put it together later. So how might we kind of decide how to cut this so that people can get the most out of their observations? Well, one idea might be separating this kind of top part that's farther away from the bottom part where the action is taking place. Another might be separating kind of a lot of the things that are for sale, the kind of objects versus the people. Another way might be separating who's behind the counter versus who's in front of the counter, noting that there are white men behind the counter and black men in front of the counter. Or you can separate it this way, between people who look like they're engaged in business and people who look like they're hanging out or waiting to be engaged in business. Or you can separate it that way, talking about people in a candid shot versus people who know that they are being photographed. And I'm not so sure the photographer meant for that to happen. We've got these guys over here breaking the fourth wall. Another strategy I call zoom in versus zoom out. And this is where you take pieces of the photograph again, but you enlarge them so that you can really concentrate on the details. So, what are some things we could look at in this photo more closely? I was actually drawn initially to this box, this display case on the counter. And so if you zoom in, you see that it says fine American made pocket knives. And so indeed, that makes sense. It looks like a row of pocket knives that are extended so that you can see the blades. And then you can ask questions like, well, how might these have been used by people at that time? And, was this something that everybody walked around with, etc. Another thing you can zoom in on might be these guys over here who are looking straight at the camera. And I like to look at their clothing that they're wearing. You can tell a lot about the time period from what they have on, the hats, the leather jacket, the denim jacket. It looks like that guy has a lot of things in his pockets, so I wonder what that is. The guy in the leather jacket looks like he's got some sort of pouch kind of tucked under his arm, so I wonder what that is, etc. Another thing you can zoom in on would be what's on those shelves. So what are the grocery items here that are for sale? So we can kind of make out, let's see, first of all, eat yeast foam. Okay, I guess somebody's making bread. And that is corroborated by how much baking powder we've got over here on the shelf. We've got this brand. We have Calumet and Clabber Girl baking powder down here. I'm not sure what's in these glass jars, but it might be pickled eggs. Oh, over here we've got Bliss coffee. So these tins that I can't read beside it might be different kinds of coffee or tea. And then other kinds of things I can't quite make out, but I am noting that everything I see is either in a metal tin or a glass jar, so no plastic to be seen. So that talks about the time period and the way that foods were preserved and sold. All right. So Another strategy is called fill in the pieces. And by this, I mean pieces of context. And this helps with your background knowledge when you're doing that reflect step of analysis. So to do this, we want to look at the bibliographic page of this photograph. And so I'm going to go to the website at the Library of Congress and look at the information that is available for this particular photograph. So for starters, we see general store. And I say fill in the pieces because you might want to feed this to your students or your audience in pieces. So first of all, give them, the title. This is general store. Of course, they probably already figured that out. Then you can fill it in further, calling it the Lakeview Cooperative Association. So some of them might be familiar with what a co-op is, and some might not. And you might wonder, okay, well, what's Lakeview? Where is it? And then you can say, well, it's Arkansas. And so now we have a location. You can scroll down to the bibliographic information and see that we have the name of photographer, Russell Lee, and we also have a date, 1938. So now we know that we are in the midst of the Great Depression and New Deal era programs. And indeed, if you look over here, you can see this is part of the Farm Security Administration Office of War Information photograph collection at the Library of Congress. So we know that Russell Lee would have been a photographer employed by the FSA to go around and take photographs of different government programs in action. So maybe the Lakeview Co-op was one of these programs. And if you go down to more items like this, you can see, oh, wow, they've got a lot of other photographs of this Lakeview project. So maybe you want to do a little bit of digging and find out more about that. Well, luckily, the state of Arkansas has a really great online encyclopedia, and they have an entry for Lakeview. And indeed, this was a New Deal program, a resettlement program for African Americans in particular in the Mississippi Delta part of Arkansas, trying to help them with cooperative farming and landowning and kind of, bring them out of poverty. So that's filling in the pieces of context until we have a lot more that we can interpret about our photograph. So one more strategy that I want to share is artist versus audience. So we already know the artist, Russell Lee, and the audience is, well, it's us, but it's also who in the 1930s would be looking at these pictures. Would it be government officials? Would it be the general public? Would it be the people who lived at these resettlement camps? Well, those are all good questions. And there's actually a blog article about Russell Lee, and it turns out he took more photographs for the FSA than any other of the famous photographers that they hired. And he comes from a wealthy white background, and there's a couple books about him if you want to find out even more, because that gets you into artist purpose. What is he trying to convey in this picture? What is he trying to get the viewer to feel or to think? And so those are all really great questions that are part of analyzing primary source images. And so that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.